Wow. I think y'all can hear me. So I'm so happy to be here with y'all. So this talk is something that has kind of been in my brain for the longest time. And it's something that's not specific to Android, but I think really works well in my life in Android. It's something I've always wanted to get a bunch of people in a room and talk to them about for 45 minutes. So perfect. Today was absolutely awesome. And what I want to talk to you all about today is this whole thing of keeping up with tech and how tech moves forward so quickly, especially in mobile and especially in Android. And how do we deal with this? And so I kind of had this thought, this kind of idea of how, and this whole kind of strategy and kind of, I don't know, kind of life kind of coda for dealing with it. And I wanted to share that with you. And some things I'll talk about, maybe they're common sense that you already know, and that's fantastic. And maybe there's something that happened to me that I found a way of dealing with it that might resonate with you. So I hope that's the case. So to kind of understand what this whole being like water thing is, I wanted to tell you kind of how I actually got into Android. And after that, I'm going to talk to you about a couple different things. I'm going to try to section it off into things that you do to keep up, things that you do to keep your hands dirty or hands wet, as the picture might more indicate, and more the way that you approach things, perspective, how you think about what's happening to you and about these changes. So there's the doing and the thinking about what you're doing. And so, how did I get into Android? So not too long ago, around 2008, 2011, I was actually working in a technology called Adobe Flex. Has anybody ever heard of it? Awesome. Was anyone a Flexer too? Cool. Okay, so y'all familiar. My people are in the room. So I did Flex in uni. I got a job, and I was having a good time. I was learning. I was building a community. I actually started speaking back then, and I kind of felt like I was really starting to get a hold of this technology, and I was going to build a great career out of it. And then in late 2011, Adobe donated Flex to the Apache Foundation, and that's not a bad thing in and of itself, but in the press release for that kind of move, they said very explicitly that while we will continue to support Adobe Flex, we believe that HTML5 is the future of web applications. And I remember sitting in an airport, and I don't know where I was going, but I'm sitting in the airport and reading this press release, and I was like, HTML5 is the future of web development, which is what I'm doing with this thing that they're saying is not the future anymore. And I remember just quietly screaming to myself in the airport and feeling like a sinkhole opened up underneath me and I fell through. And it just occurred to me, I was like, man, I have to get a new job. In fact, I have to get a whole new technology. And I'm not gonna lie, it was really rough for a while. I had no idea what I was gonna do. I spent weeks and months, sometimes without a gig, sometimes with, and it actually kind of worked out. So while I was doing Flex, I became really good friends with another Flex developer, and he was really into this thing called Android. And we'd have conversations where he told me all about this Open Handset Alliance thing, and I was a little bit, I'll admit, I was a little dismissive at first. I was like, oh, mobile, iPhone, don't they have that covered? But because I got into the situation where I had to find a new job, and I needed to find a new technology, I was like, all right. We had actually been kind of doing a little bit of Android kind of at the beginning. Look, let me teach you Android, And I was like, all right, fine, I'll learn some Android. And it turns out when I actually got my first job, which that friend of mine helped me get, my very first Android job, not too long after the sinkhole opened up underneath me and I had to change jobs, I found that I loved it. I loved mobile. I feel like, it was what I was meant to do. I love this ability to build things, beautiful things that people can hold in their hands. And it worked out. And there were some other rough months, kind of back then. There weren't a lot of mobile jobs, and so there weren't too many Android jobs after that one kind of finished. So I ended up doing iOS for a while, and now I'm back in Android. And I think the thing that I took out of that is that I don't ever want to feel that way again. I don't ever want to sit in an airport and wonder, what the heck am I going to do? Where am I going to go from here? I never want to feel that way again. And when I say that, I don't mean that I'm going to pick a tech and that's going to be the tech that I do for the rest of my life. That is impossible. And so that experience taught me that you can never be comfortable, and that what we do today is almost assuredly not what we're going to be doing 5, 10 years from now. And that it's not that we need to pick the right tech that lasts us for the rest of our life, but that we have to understand what we need to do to keep up with it, and to be okay with it, how to cope with this whole process. And so that's where kind of the idea for this talk came from. And I'm just going to call him out, that friend of mine who got me to Android and saved my life. hi, honey, is actually my fiance sitting up in the front. so that friendship and relationship worked out, and so did Android. So there's this quote by Bruce Lee. I'm sorry, the Asian person's quoting Bruce Lee. I know. But it kind of came from like a martial arts show that he did, but I think it really encapsulated this idea that I had now of how to deal with changes in tech, and I hope the sound works. It doesn't. All right. So I'm going to go back, and I'm actually going to read this for you, because I've been practicing this. Oh. All right. Bruce says, empty your mind. Be formless, shapeless, like water. You put water into a cup, it becomes the cup. You put water into a bottle, it becomes the bottle. You put water into a teapot, it becomes the teapot. Now water can flow or it can crash. Be water, my friend. And I think this just kind of became like my whole way of dealing with tech, because that's what our lives in tech are, right? It's us, it's this water, and we might go from technology to technology, from container to container, and while kind of our experiences, our essence, sorry to get a little bit kind of crazy with it, but our experiences, our skills, our ability to problem solve, our passion for this work will be the same. And we might just go from container to container, and that's okay. The experience, the ability for you to do beautiful, cool things will stay the same. It's just that your container will change. And so we have to be formless. We have to be able to kind of change and adapt to the situations that we're in. And so that's kind of like, that has been like kind of like my drive to dealing with all this. And it's funny because even though I'm doing it in a way totally different tech, mobile versus web, my life is actually kind of the same in certain ways. Nowadays I go to Google I/O, or if I can get in. Back then I used to go to Adobe Max, which was basically the Google I/O of Flex. And these days I'm making UIs in XML. And back then I was making UIs in XML. And these days, I go on YouTube and I watch people like Chet Haas explain to me how to do cool things in in Android. But I also watched videos with Chet Haas back then explaining how to do cool things. And kind of wearing the same shirt too, with the same hand gestures. So, even if your life in tech changes, some things really weirdly stay the same. So with that in mind, I think that I've tried to keep this, this kind of very positive look that, hey, Android changes and tech changes, and that's a good thing. And I think I want to keep this lesson in mind that, hey, tech is going to change, and it's your job. It is part of your job as people in tech, as engineers, as designers, to keep up with it. And Android teaches you that every single day, every single week, every single year, in all kinds of different ways. So it changes all the time, and sometimes, it's kind of crazy. Looking at, it might be hard to see in the back, but, what is it, 8 years now of Android? And just seeing how much it's changed in that time. Probably, I think definitely for the better. Is that definitely an enhanced level of sexiness in the last 8 years. And it's not just superficial stuff, and who knows what Android might look like in 10 years. Will we still have Android? Will we still have mobile phones? Will everything be downloaded to our brains like the Matrix? Who knows? And it's kind of crazy. Change is really tough, but change is amazing. And I think a lot of times it can be so frustrating, but embracing it and trying to look at it positively while still coping with all the things that you have to do as an actual person and developer and designer is kind of the key to not going crazy. Changes transform. Nowadays, back a few years ago, people would talk about Android as being, the mobile platform that doesn't have good design. And now we have material and a whole language and a way of expressing, ideas in really cool ways. Changes keep us honest. I think it's really important sometimes, as developers, we have to ship it, right? And sometimes we cut corners, and maybe sometimes it's better for us, it feels better for us to lock our activities in portrait mode. But then something like multi-window comes out and shows us why we shouldn't do that if we want to do the cool things. And sometimes changes can help things that were a little bit flawed before, like the new permission systems, right? When Marshmallow came out and you targeted Marshmallow, you really, really needed to kind of rethink your permissions. And I don't think anyone can argue that it's a better thing for the user to be able to have more control and more information about what permissions you're asking of them. But for developers, it's a lot harder, right? We have to actually ask for permissions and actually think through what happens when they don't give it to us. How do we, change the flow of our app to make that work? And it's a lot harder on us. And yeah, it's changed, but overall, it's a good thing. And changes can help us bring the new and improve things. I'm really excited for Android O, whatever it might be. And for things like picture-in-picture, I'm a big YouTuber, so that'll be awesome. And for notification channels. And so, change can sometimes just bring all the new toys and all the kind of things that we wish that we had. And sometimes change brings us a whole new language that some of us are extraordinarily excited about. But change brings work. It takes work to kind of adapt to these changes and to learn these new things. And even apart from the platform itself, libraries, tools, and patterns change all the time. And it can be tough. There's always something new. So this actually happened to me a few weeks ago. I saw Don Felker tweet out, "Oh, hey, RxJava 3 preview is out." And I'm sitting here thinking, I haven't even really gotten to RxJava 2 yet. So what am I, these things happen all the time. And it's okay. So, it really can be overwhelming, like these changes. What do I do? Like, we all have only 24 hours in a day. Hopefully some of them are, kind of devoted to sleep. We have families, we have hobbies, we have things outside of our work lives. How do we, deal with it? And sometimes it feels easier to just kind of, stick with what you're doing right now. It feels easiest and like the path of least resistance to just go with what works and stay there. But you can't be stagnant with tech, and especially with Android, you just can't. Because there might be an alligator waiting for you at the bottom of that serene and kind of gross-looking water, and so you have to keep moving. You have to kind of go with where the tech takes you. And I think like the first part of really staying ahead and kind of going with the flow and keeping up with Android is knowing what's going on right now and what's coming up on the horizon. And so here's where I'm going to actually talk about real things. And so I know that the program said that this is going to be like my strategies and kind of solutions to keeping up, but I think a lot of surviving in tech is seeing what cool kids do, seeing what the awesome people that are succeeding are doing. And so I actually had to ask just some of the many cool kids out there. Some of them are in the audience out there. Hello. Thank you for letting me pester you with questions. And so I wanted to share some of my favorite kind of ways of keeping up and some of my favorite things that I've discovered and that I actually gleaned from some of these really, really cool kids. So thank you to just some of those cool kids. I wish I could have talked to all the cool kids, but you all would have been here for like 5 hours. So like, how do we keep up with Android? So the number one thing that I think has helped me in my career, and that hopefully, seeing it as how all of y'all are here today, that you might know already, is community. I don't think there's any more valuable tool for learning what's new and how to do things than meeting other people and sharing experiences with them, listening to what they like and what's working for them, how they struggled and how they solved problems, and to likewise do the same thing. And I think if I had never gotten into community, I would not, be as comfortable or be able to do the things that, I do at work or be able to see the other amazing things that other people are doing. So I think if there's anything that you do, if you do nothing else, please try to be part of your community. And it's not just meetups, and there are a lot of amazing meetups. There's Google developer groups, there's local kind of Droid meetups a lot of time, but also conferences. Obviously, you all probably know that conferences are a good place to get information since you're all sitting here. And we obviously all heard of Google I/O, but there are just so many. There's this conference, 360 and Dev. There's all the GDG Dev Fest, and I actually highly encourage you to go represent your local kind of divisions of GDGs or your local meetups, whatever they be. Be local, meet people out there, learn from them, and share what you have as well. And I think a lot of times it's not just about going out and hearing what other cool people are doing, but in the process of sharing what you do, you learn things and you figure things out on your own as well. Kind of I think a more kind of traditional and kind of old, reliable way of keeping up with things with blogs. I think my first few years of Android, I just lived in blogs. And they're really awesome. And I think what's really great is that before, there was when I first started Android, I think there were maybe 2, 3, 4 blogs that I just knew of. I'm sure there were more, but that I just kind of visited all the time and always had up. But now, like we have such a broader, more diverse community, and we have so many people cranking out incredible content that I think the traditional way of like just kind of going to a blog and kind of like every like week or so and checking things out is all right, but doesn't work great. And so one of the kind of common tips that I heard from all the cool kids about how they keep up is things like newsletters. And I think a lot of keeping up with Android is not just kind of compiling information, but being able to filter through it, because it's hard. There's a lot. And so things like newsletters, like if you haven't already signed up for Android Weekly and other kind of weekly kind of Android tech-related newsletters like Android Dev Digest, if you're a Kotlin person, there's Kotlin Weekly. And it's just a quick way for you to get the scoop on kind of some of the best content that's out that week. So another awesome thing is Reddit. I know Reddit seems really scary sometimes, but we in the Android community actually have a really good Android developers subreddit, and it's moderated by some really awesome people in the community. Some of them are GDEs, and some of them are just amazing people that care, and that will be out there to save you from the bad people that you think might live on Reddit. So, and it's also just a really good way, because of the natural kind of way that Reddit works, right? The good stuff tends, like the interesting stuff or the hot stuff tends to float to the top. So it's definitely somewhere that you should visit. It's okay. There may be dragons elsewhere, but Android Dev is actually pretty good. So Twitter. I think part of, again, the whole problem with keeping up with Android is just the volume of information. And I think actually Twitter, despite, it might seem a little counterintuitive because oftentimes Twitter can be kind of a fire hose of all kinds of things going on, but I think actually a lot of times when I hear about something new and interesting, it's through Twitter. And there are official Twitter accounts that you can follow, both from kind of like the general Android Studio teams or something. There are individual Googlers who are always kind of posting out like cool things that they're doing or when they're releasing new things. Or kind of dev and design rels that are posting kind of interesting ideas or kind of like ways to approach the different subjects. And there are also just really great community devs who are, that probably is not very easy to read back there, I'm sorry. But there are really great devs in the community who do spend a lot of time creating tutorials and kind of evaluations of different things in tech, and kind of listening to tweets is a good way of kind of keeping up with when they post something new. And every now and again, you might actually just kind of see a really cool tip that someone pushes out. And you don't actually generally get that from a blog. Just kind of this idea that someone had, or someone was up really late and said, hey, I just figured this thing out. And what's neat about Twitter, I think, is that generally when you build kind of like your, I guess, follower, like the people that you're following, they'll generally tend to follow people that you follow. And you might miss something sometimes because you probably shouldn't be on Twitter 24/7, though that was really tempting. But people that you follow will generally retweet and like things that you probably will retweet and like. So it's kind of a good way of, again, of like maybe having a little bit of redundancy in the information coming out. So, so kind of going back to this idea of community, I think another place where, so say maybe you just don't happen to be near a local meetup, or you're super, super shy like some of us, or you travel all the time and you just can't make it to things. There are a lot of like digital chat communities out there where you can get a lot of that same benefit, where you can go and like ask people questions and discuss things with people and debate on like, what about this technology versus that technology, and ask questions. And I feel sometimes too, these kind of communities, and there's a lot of them. There's a lot of like, even like if you're not a native English speaker, I know that there's like a Portuguese Android Slack community and a Spanish speaking one. And they're out there, but it can be really intimidating, and I think that is often a problem, is that sometimes you'll sit in a Slack room and people are talking about something and you don't quite understand it and you want to ask a question and you don't want to like seem dumb by asking a dumb question, and you just sit there and you don't say anything. It happens. But I would highly encourage you to participate. Maybe there are less friendly communities out there, but there are some really good ones out there. And look, you should try to participate if you can, but if you can't, I'll tell you a secret, lurking and creeping on a channel is totally okay too. There's been so many times where I've sat in a channel and people are talking about something that I don't quite understand, or kind of something that I'm learning, I'm very new at, and they'll say a word or phrase, right? And I don't know what that is now, but I'll remember that for later. And I'll be like, look, some smart people are talking about this thing, I'm going to learn about this thing. And so sometimes creeping and lurking is totally fine, but definitely kind of visit them. And I feel like a lot of people that I talked to, some of those really awesome kids said, yeah, sometimes I just sit and listen, even if it's something that I'm not familiar with or don't know yet. It's just a good way to kind of see what people are doing, kind of take the pulse of what the community is on about. So I am actually a big kind of media kind of fan, I've really liked podcasts for a long time. And I think what's really awesome is that our community has this cool kind of like, I guess, its own little media circuit, right? So there are tons of podcasts where you can get information. And what I love about podcasts is that, we're all really busy, we're all doing all kinds of things, but I can put my headphones on and like wash dishes or cook and listen to stuff about Android. I know, like, I've talked to Chuki, and I think one day she was talking about how she was catching up with Fragmented while she was gardening out, like gardening. And so it's a really good way of kind of like, I guess, maximizing your, I guess, bandwidth, I guess, by trying to absorb information in different ways and at different places, at different times rather. And so, like, if you happen to not have tried some of these podcasts before, I definitely recommend them. There's Android Developers Backstage, which is produced by Chet Haas and Tor Norby at Google. There's Fragmented, run by Don and Kaushik. Kaushik's over there somewhere. It's like, I think, a perennial favorite as well, and they always have really great conversations, devs in the community. There are lots of podcasts for non-English speakers. The one I'm going to mention is XFM. It's actually a Japanese language Android podcast, and I know there's a French one too, but I couldn't find it. So I apologize, but and there's also like Talking Kotlin, if you're a Kotlin type person. So it's kind of amazing how we kind of taken the tech development education community kind of into this new kind of like media era, and we have really high quality content in the community. And as I said, I'm kind of a video media nut. I think YouTube also is really great. And I mean, just as an example, the Android Developers YouTube channel just has everything. It has not just, like talks from I/O, but really good kind of like really tiny little consumable pieces of information, like new patterns and new things, and like kind of like quick tips on how to do different things. So there's just a wide array of places for you to get information. And it almost feels like too much sometimes. Like, how do I keep them? I know like a problem that I have is that I'll tend to like bookmark things, and say, all right, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to read this article, I'm going to understand every single line and paragraph, even if I have to go to Wikipedia or Stack Overflow like 20 times. And the problem with that is that while you're kind of trying to sit at this one thing and grok it, 30 more things come down the pipe, and they get added to your list. And so I think part of trying to keep up is kind of knowing when to just let it wash over you. A friend of mine was saying that about something else, but like he was saying, you know what, don't worry about paying 100% attention. Just let it wash over you, and you'll pick up some important things. And while there are some things that I do take time still to kind of really sit down and analyze and peel apart and look up things on Stack Overflow for, sometimes, especially with podcasts and video, sometimes if you just let it wash over you, and if you can find just one thing, one concept, one feature, one tool that you didn't know before, that made it worth it. That is the one thing that you can get out of that thing, and then just move on to the next thing, because you can't just stay still. You have to kind of keep up with the current. And I think part of what helps with that whole letting it wash over you thing is taking notes. So very specifically, kind of like one of the backbones for me is when I'm trying to analyze all this information and keep track of it is Pocket. Pocket is this kind of application that is kind of multi-platform. It's on web and it's on mobile, and it allows you to kind of bookmark things, but it will actually also download the content and sync it across devices. And a lot of the content that you get from like a blog post or something, like images, the actual text, will be available for you offline. So if you travel a lot, you can put a whole bunch of stuff in Pocket and sit on the plane and just catch up. And some things like video, there's probably like copyright legal reasons that you can't get video on Pocket. But if you have a whole bunch of blog posts and you have like a 10-hour flight, you're good. You can just read, and you get all the nice, pretty pictures and everything too. So that's really been helpful to me. But sometimes you don't have to be so fancy with an app that kind of syncs and downloads all the content. Just taking notes. And I think a lot of times when we're at conferences or when we're out in the community, just an idea, a thought, or a new thing comes across our way, just write it down. I have this like whole Google Keep filled with just like random phrases of things that I heard at a conference that I don't quite understand. And so I just put it in Google Keep. Or sometimes if you want to be like kind of analog about it, you can totally take notes. I do still take notes sometimes too, and I think that there's, I swear I heard this in a psychology class before, that when you write something down, the act of writing it kind of reinforces it in your brain. And so if that works for you, continue to do that, please. But you can take your note taking to another level. I haven't done this yet. But there's this whole kind of sketch noting that has happened a lot in the community. And if you follow Chuki or you follow Corey Laszlo, you might sometimes see these tweets with these beautiful notes. And again, I think it's just a great way to kind of engage yourself with the content more and try to force yourself to understand things as you're taking these gorgeous notes. because gosh, I wish I could do something like that. But really, the whole idea is that when you're consuming this information, when you're trying to filter and figure out what's important to you, it's not always necessarily about understanding it right then. It's about kind of knowing what you need to know and saving ideas for when you need them. This new API, you might read about a new API in O, and you might not need it right away. You might not need it for 3 months. But I think it's important in keeping up that you just get a feeling. You kind of have this idea of what's in the periphery. And so when things do come up, when you finally realize, hey, I need that thing, and a lot of times it just comes up unexpectedly, that you have that there and that you know what you don't know, or that you know what you have to go find out. And so don't focus too much on knowing every single little thing. Just kind of get an idea of the lay of the land and be able to come back to it later. So when it comes to keeping up with Android, sometimes you just have to do it. You have to start doing things and integrating in new APIs or kind of learning a new library. And I think sometimes the best thing is just to go for it. Just take a dive. And there's different ways to do this. I'm sure everybody here has gone online and taught themselves something. There's so many different tutorials out there. I think we're pretty lucky that the Google tutorials are actually pretty good. I actually recently in the last year started looking at code labs. I think time and attention are things that often escape me. I don't know about y'all, but I tend to have a short attention span. And so sometimes tutorials work for me, and sometimes doing these code labs, which are actually timed, and that kind of take you through how to implement a thing or how to play with this new feature really quickly, are a great way to approach it. And there's like external sites too that offer tutorials and like videos, and there's just so much out there. And sometimes, depending on how you're feeling, depending on I don't know, whether you're stressed out or whether you have time, you might have to approach learning a new thing in a different way. Maybe a long holistic tutorial isn't what you need. Maybe a quick code lab or a quick little 2-minute video where someone shows you how to do something neat is a different way. So experiment, play around, figure out what works for you. But sometimes you just have to get in the code and just go for it and experiment. And I feel like when you're trying to learn something new, there's kind of different ways to approach it, right? I actually have not a test project, but I have some APIs that I know where I have a concept, okay? All right, I'm gonna try this new thing and I'm going to make a photo grid app. And there's some really great APIs out there. I tend to use Unsplash a lot because it's public and you can actually access a lot of the endpoints without having to authenticate anything. But the idea is whenever you kind of sit down and try to learn something new and you want to start up a test or dummy project, have a theme that you come back to. Have a thing that challenges you. Sometimes it's hard to just do it. Obviously, sometimes a Hello World project is not quite enough. You need to actually have a goal, have a real world application that challenges you, that makes you find corner cases. And I think finding things that break and that don't work for you and learning how to fix them is the biggest part, at least for me, of learning things. So I think having kind of a very specific goal and a very specific kind of product almost that you're trying to build is really important. But sometimes it helps just to kind of see what's out there and reuse it. There are a lot of really great open source projects out there that have working examples of things. And sometimes the best way to learn is just to take it and poke at it and break it, take it apart, and try to put it back together again. And hopefully you're successful with that. Something I learned about in last year was this Android architecture blueprints project. In Android we have so many things. We have different architectures and MVP and MVVM, and there's Dagger, and there's RX, and oh my gosh, how do I get to all these things? The Android Architecture Blueprints project is actually really neat because it takes the idea of a to-do app, and then it has these different branches where this to-do app is kind of implemented with kind of different permutations and combinations of all these different things that we have in Android. And so, a lot, when I was trying to figure out some things with Dagger, I actually downloaded the project and kind of poked at it and tried to see, if I could break it and then put it back together again, and what does this thing do, and it gives you a kind of touch point to dig into source code and to dig into things and to kind of figure things out. Whenever I'm doing kind of UI stuff, I love looking at Plaid, which Nick Butcher has created. Hi, Nick. And it's also, again, just when you see something cool that someone else does and it's open source, just get in there and see what they're doing. And again, take it apart, see how it works. And even the libraries that we like, generally I think we're pretty lucky in that in Android, a lot of the open source libraries that we have all have example projects. And again, take that project, poke around with it, add something new, add something that you're interested in, and try to get it to work. And sometimes, like I talk to a lot of the cool kids, and this is kind of something that I think happens a lot, is that sometimes the best way to kind of try something new is to try it on your side project. I feel like that happens a lot, right? We tend to have our, I don't know, $1 million or not so $1 million app ideas, or just something that we really like and want to put out in the world. And again, sometimes learning is taking something and trying to make a thing out of it, make an app out of it, make a product out of it. And that the kind of, I don't know, like requirements and restrictions that you want to put on yourself to make your awesome side project can be very illuminating about how do you get this thing to work within that context. For example, I'm a big kind of fan of Dota 2 as a video game, and every time I do a talk, every time I try to learn something new, I go back to my Dota app and try to add it in, and it's because it's something I'm really passionate about, that I want to do a really cool app for this thing that I love, that I push myself. I try to do weird things. I try to see like how I can, make it look like this other cool app I saw, and I think part of like learning and driving yourself to keep up is trying to just stay motivated. It's really tough sometimes with the 1.5 million things that we have to learn to keep up with it. And I think having a project that you care about, that you're passionate about, that you want to make as cool as possible, can push you to learn new things and push you to fix something at 3 a.m. that you broke like just 30 minutes ago and are about to go to bed. And it can keep you up for that extra half hour, and you can fix it and do amazing things. And sometimes you might want to try something different. At my office at Trello, we just started using Kotlin, I think, back last fall. And we all kind of had our different ways of learning. I kind of went online and did the Kotlin koans, which were kind of like little mini tutorials. Dan Liu, my esteemed colleague, did something a little different. So there's this thing called Advent of Code, which is this series of like coding puzzles. And it's not really like, it's not like, it's not a contest, it's not like there's any kind of prescribed language. It's just a bunch of puzzles to solve, and it's fun. And he actually taught himself Kotlin by going through Advent of Code and just kind of trying to solve the different puzzles, but using Kotlin. And so sometimes have fun with it. Just do something interesting and crazy, something that just is enjoyable to you, and learn through that. It keeps you motivated, keeps you going. And yeah, maybe there's this really hard puzzle that you really want to solve, but gosh darn it, you're going to do it with Kotlin. And just find different ways. Find something that appeals to you and use that to help you learn new things. So sometimes you just kind of go for it. Give a talk. I've done this a lot, and I think again, like because we've got so many other things going on, we have actual work, we have other lives, that it can be hard to kind of sit down and learn something, and sometimes you have to force yourself to do it. And so this is a total legit strategy to say, all right, I'm going to give a talk on this thing. I'm going to go to my local GDG or meetup, and I'm going to talk about this new thing that I learned. And I talked to my friend Christina the other day, and she had a great description for it. She called it accountability. And I think that's partly kind of, that's a great way of thinking about it. Like, hold yourself accountable. Give yourself a deadline and a goal to learn something. Please don't just go there and like regurgitate information, but look at something. Learn what you like about it, what you hate about it, what gives you problems, how you fix those problems, and share that with other people. And you will not just kind of force yourself to learn something, but you'll help other people learn as well. And I think it's a great way. Like, it has so many benefits. Just give a talk, force yourself to learn something, and share what you know. I think the easiest thing, though, and like the most ideal thing, is like keeping up at work. How, like it's always probably, it feels bestest when we can bring that cool new sexy thing into work. And look, it's not always easy. It depends on your project, it depends on your team, it depends on your company. Are you at a big company where you have to go through a lot of different levels of approval because maybe you handle sensitive user information, maybe there's security concerns, or maybe you have a large code base where it wouldn't really make sense to just plop something new in and let the users see the crashes when things don't work. Maybe you work on an SDK team where you have to be extremely careful about what bugs you propagate, not just to users, but to other developers, because it's not like they can reach into your code and fix it. And so, no, it's not always easy to keep up at work, and it's not always easy to introduce those new things, but there are some ways that you can try to get it going and try to kind of, I guess, try to kind of start sneaking things in. So, proof of concept. A lot of times when it comes to introducing a new thing, sometimes you just have to show your lead, your, I guess, business side, your kind of upper level people, that something is valuable. Do a proof of concept. Show them that, hey, this new library will make us more efficient in this, is more stable and secure with persistence, or allows us to do A, B, and C, but in a more efficient way that will help the team's productivity. Maybe sometimes you have to let things coexist. remember I was talking to Emma Guy, who is an Android developer in London, and we were talking about dealing with legacy code. And she said sometimes when they're bringing in something new, especially in a big code base, they'll kind of let different things coexist. So for example, like maybe you're on Dagger 1, you're working with a dependency injection, and you really want to move to Dagger 2. You can, in some cases, and this sounds really bad, maybe have, kind of keep your Dagger 1 in kind of most of your app, but start converting things incrementally to Dagger 2, let things coexist. And yeah, that sounds kind of gross, and you don't want to do that forever, but a lot of times incrementally, little by little, kind of taking like a solid use case, changing it over to the new thing, making sure, testing it, making sure that it doesn't break, and saying that, hey, this is okay, let's move on to the next thing. Letting things coexist and doing things incrementally is a great way to kind of introduce new things at work. Isolation, that sounds kind of lonely and boring, but it's really not. Sometimes you can add new things in very isolated areas, kind of almost quarantine the new things. And when you kind of get to a point where you're comfortable with your team's skill level, or you're comfortable with the kind of production readiness of something, you can introduce it into the rest of the code base. So for example, kind of going back to Kotlin, because everyone's talking about Kotlin these days, when we introduced Kotlin at work, we started with tests, right? So we didn't put anything in production code, we just tried it out in tests. And if it broke in the testing, sure, we fixed it, or we just went back to Java. But we eventually kind of got comfortable enough with Kotlin as a language, and also kind of got comfortable enough with it as a production ready language that we introduced it into the main code base. And sometimes it's really awesome to just introduce things when you have a brand new feature, greenfield projects. That's how I learned Kotlin, actually. So I was sitting there doing tutorials and kind of getting it, but kind of not. And then I had this opportunity to do this new feature, and it was a new feature that didn't really touch anything else. It just had this one kind of entry point into the rest of the code, and I was like, all right, but it's in Kotlin. And because it was kind of on its own, because it was a new thing, I could play around and make new classes and try this feature and that feature and really explore things. And because it was a new feature and wasn't too tightly integrated with all the things, I could kind of mess up a little bit and fix it and figure things out and kind of let it go through beta and fix things. So yeah, sometimes new projects, new features are great places to introduce something new. And really, you should just be okay with making changes a drop at a time. So to go back to that water metaphor, the biggest canyons, the kind of most interesting and beautiful features happen over time. And hopefully the changes you need to make in your Android life won't take hundreds and thousands of years like this canyon did. But the concept is still the same. We have other things. We have new features to ship. We have bugs to fix. And we have other things that are priorities for us. And so it's okay to make changes a drop at a time. And I know sometimes with the way that tech moves and everything's really fast, we feel like we have to do the new thing now. But you don't. Learn things gradually. Build up over time. Build your skills over time. And even when it comes to introducing this new thing at work, wear people down. Keep bugging your manager about why this library is awesome and why that feature is awesome, and keep showing him again and again, or her rather, him or her, whatever your manager is, keep showing them and keep coming back to them and keep pressing them. Kind of encourage people and do things incrementally. And change both yourself and your team just a bit at a time. And look, it'll be rough for a while. It always is, learning something new. I think that was the most intimidating thing about learning, say, a new language is that, hey, I've spent I don't know how many years working on Java, and I still don't quite understand it, and now I'm just going to go ahead and learn a whole new language. And it's intimidating. And you don't want to go back to feeling like you don't know anything. You don't want to go back to being that bumbling fawn, trying to learning how to walk, and you just want to push code and get things done. But it's okay. It will be rough, but you can make it a good experience. So I want to show you something. Okay, it's really hard to see, but this is my first Kotlin PR, and I'll tell you. So there's 296 added lines and 68 comments. And if you kind of take into the fact that some of those comments are just me saying, okay, I'll do that, this PR had basically one comment for every 6 lines. And I think if I had just encountered this when I first started development, I'd probably just jump out the window. But actually, really, it was really fun. It was really great. And even though it seemed really intimidating and it hurts to have a comment every 6 lines, it actually was a great conversation. We were all learning this new thing, and it wasn't just, hey, you should change this and do this differently. But it was like, hey, did you know about this feature? Or hey, did you know about that feature? And a couple of them were like, hey, you did this thing that I didn't know, and it looks pretty cool. So, sometimes it'll be rough, but, kind of support each other. Have an environment where you can, discuss the new things and kind of work through things together. And it can be really awesome. And I think part of learning and coping is learning how to celebrate. When I made my first Kotlin file, I've been talking to Christina Lee, hello Christina Lee again, about Kotlin for a long time. And the first thing I did when I opened my first Kotlin file was I went to Christina and messaged her, Christina, I just made my first Kotlin file. And she was like, oh my gosh, you just made your first Kotlin file. And I think that's really important. You need support. You need someone to be excited for you. And so find people, maybe at your work, maybe out in the community, that love and are excited about these new things and support you and that geek out about things with you. And it doesn't even have to be a complex sitting down and analyzing of the complexities and the structure of this feature or anything like that. You could just sit around and geek out about, hey, I'm doing this thing, and just enjoy it, celebrate. Learning new things is awesome and amazing and tough and crazy, and when you succeed at something, congratulate yourself. Sit down, enjoy it, and share that joy with somebody else. So, this is a big thing. When you're learning something, ask more questions. I wish someone had told me this when I first started working. I think sometimes we get into positions with tech where we're intimidated, where we don't want to appear, weak or less experienced or unknowledgeable. So I know for me that was a big problem I had. I just never asked questions because I just didn't want to seem like I didn't know anything. And that was incredibly, stupidly the wrong way to do things. Ask questions. If there's something that you don't understand after reading Stack Overflow, after going to the Wikipedia, ask questions, because it's very likely that someone out there will have had the same question you did 3 weeks ago, that they just happened to have run into this one bug that you did, and they have the answer for you. Don't be afraid to ask questions. That's how we all learn. And yeah, some people are kind of jerks when they're answering questions, but a lot of people aren't. A lot of people are going through the same thing that you are, and so don't be afraid to ask questions. Find people that are really into sharing and really want to share their knowledge with you, and that are understanding of, what it's like to learn a new thing, and ask questions. Please, 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 please. Ask more questions. So I think a lot of times one of the things that's really intimidating about Android and learning new things is when something new and interesting comes along, and it seems like all the cool kids are starting to do it, and you're just like, what? What is this new thing? Do I need to do this now? Is this going to be the thing that everyone has to do, and should I do it too? And it can be really exciting, but also really frustrating when you're trying to just get a feature out, do a thing, work at your job, and this new thing comes out that everyone's kind of latching on to. Do I need to do this as well? And I think part of the frustration of that is trying to figure out, is this something that I have to drop everything and do? I know I talked before about going with the flow and kind of fitting the container that you're in, but I think going with flow doesn't mean just automatically doing whatever everyone else is doing. It's more this idea of kind of going where the current takes you. And maybe the current takes you into this new trendy thing that all the cool kids are doing, and maybe it's not. And I think we it's hard to, we tend to kind of confuse the new cool thing that all kids are doing with that all the cool kids are doing with a thing that will really help me. And I think part of kind of keeping up with all the new things and staying sane is to be critical and to look at things and to analyze it. And really what you should be doing is what is best for you, what is best for your project, and what is best for your team. And maybe that is the new cool thing, and maybe it isn't. Whenever you approach something new, whenever something cool comes down the way, be open about it, be curious, kind of ask questions about it, look into it, but at the same time be critical. Analyze it, think about the advantages and disadvantages, and just make the decision, be analytical about whether it's good for you. And to be honest with you, I think that's way more important than doing the cool new thing or following trends, is to be open to them, but to understand completely whether it's actually good for you. Because that's what engineering is. That's what this whole tech development thing is solving problems. And if something new comes along, awesome. Ask yourself, is this going to help me solve my problem better? Is this going to make my app more performant? Is this going to better the experience for my users? And let that be your guide. And sometimes the answer to that question will be yes, and you'll fit into the cup very nicely, and you'll kind of, and that will be where the water takes you. And sometimes that won't be where it takes you. Maybe sometimes your particular problem will not fit the mold that everybody else is in. And kind of going back to the water metaphor, you can overflow. You can kind of exit that container that you're in and do something different. Sometimes someone will take that cup and dump your water out on the desk, and you have to figure something out, and that's okay. Do what's best for you. That to me is what this job is about. So it depends. I think if there's anything that anyone's going to put, when they bury me, I think it depends will be what they put on my gravestone, because I feel like I keep saying that. I'll give talks and people will ask questions, and half the time the answer is, well, it depends, because that's what engineering is, figuring out the best solution, the optimization to your problem. And this whole thing with figuring out whether the new cool thing is the thing for you, there's a little bit of luck. So I asked some cool kids, and I don't want to name drop too much, but the one thing that really stuck with me is I talked to Jake Warden, and I asked him, how do you keep up? And the thing he said is that, with like things that he has kind of spent time into and that ended up being kind of big things, he says, I kind of just got lucky. And I was like, that's kind of comforting, It's just like, it's not that there's this ultimate truth out there that some people can see but that you can't. Sometimes people just get lucky and they go down a path and they try this new thing out and other people try it and they like it too, and it ends up kind of being this cool thing that a lot of people use, and it's totally fine. So really quickly, I'm running out of time. One big rule that I have is don't drink the poison, and I'm going to explain what that is really quickly. In tech, it is really easy for us to get into this situation where we are pitting ourselves against other people. And we like to say that, hey, your thing is wrong, my thing is better, you're just copying something else. And it happens a lot. I have done this in the past, maybe not as publicly, but inside. I know like when I was back in Flex, I felt that other plugins were my enemies. I hated HTML5 and I hated Silverlight, and we're going to win this whole rich internet application war, and we didn't. And I think part of what hurt sometimes is when I had to change jobs in technology is that I felt like they won. They defeated us. Tech is not like that, and I think that's one thing that I've learned that has really helped me is that Dan Kim actually from Basecamp wrote this great kind of Medium post about how programming languages aren't a zero-sum game, and I think that kind of summarizes how I feel about certain things. It's not always a zero-sum game, and I think that it's really easy because we invest time and effort and our careers into these particular things to get very defensive and to feel like that we're fighting for our lives and we're fighting for our livelihoods when we fight for this one thing. But I think when we let go of that and we can understand that things will change, and this thing that you have invested like 100, 200 hours of your life in might not be there next year, that's okay. And you can adapt, and you should not narrow your focus. And I think that's what happens. Not drinking the poison is not just about being nice to each other, which we should be. That's a good thing. But it's more about being practical. We as programmers all exist in this solution space. We all have a problem. Not like a problem like that. We all have a problem we're trying to solve. My app, your website, whatever it is, we are solving problems. And even though it might not seem like it, we all live in the same solution space. This kind of like foggy room where the optimal answer to our problem, the optimal implementation of our app is somewhere in the corner. And we're all kind of groping around and trying to feel what that optimal solution is. And I think more often than not, we share that solution space with other people, other platforms, other companies that annoy you sometimes. And when you drink the poison, when you put yourself against other people, you close off your solution space. When you kind of say, I'm not going to use that thing because I don't like that company, or you suck and because you're just copying a thing from me. When you kind of drink that delicious, wonderful poison, because it feels good sometimes to say, you suck and here's 10 reasons why. When you drink that poison, you close yourself off. And I think that is something that I know I did. And that I think a lot of the stress and the ability to cope with change has come from stopping drinking that poison. So be like water, don't drink poison. Water is better than poison. Which is probably a good rule in general in life, but in tech it's also a good thing. I'm running out of time, but just an example, RxJava is something that I've really come to love and work with a lot in the last few years. Actually came from Microsoft and from a subsidiary that was doing it for .NET and Silverlight. My old nemesis Silverlight. It's just like, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't take away from you when someone else does a cool thing. You can introduce interesting ideas and interesting concepts, and sometimes the best way of keeping up is to see what other people are doing and see if it works for you. Maybe something in iOS or Silverlight or Microsoft works for you, and you can bring in a cool idea. And so we have to be open. And so I'm going to hurry up because I know I'm running way over time. I'm going to tell you the secret. Here's the secret to keeping up in Android. And the secret is that everyone feels behind. Every single person that I asked, every single cool person that I asked, said that they feel behind in Android all the time. And the answers range from, oh yeah, very frequently, and all the time, oh my gosh, imposter syndrome. And look, the point is that you're not alone. You're not behind. We're all in this together. We're all trying to find the path to keeping up, and just reach out to each other. Reach out to each other, keep up. We're all in the same kind of weird little boat, plodding along, trying to figure out how to best solve our problems. And you should never feel like you're alone or feel like you're behind. And that's where I'm going to end it. Thank you so much. Enjoy 360.